evening and welcome to the Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting of July 14th, 2022, starting at 6:30. This meeting will take place partially remotely pursuant to the law signed by Governor Baker on February 16th of 2022, an act further extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which includes extension until July 15th of 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The meeting will be accessible to the public in public comment via the Monomoy Regional School District Zoom meeting link and to be broadcasted on Channel 22. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order at 6:31, and we'll do a roll call attendance. Also, before we do the roll call attendance, can I just ask all the members to please keep your mics on tonight? I guess we've been having some audio issues, so instead of turning them on and off, just make sure they're green at all times, and hopefully that will help, especially with the impending storm. Okay, and roll call vote. I'll start with the Zoom room. Sharon?
I lost you there for a minute visually, but I'm here.
Thank you, Sharon. Ms. Tolley?
Present.
Ms. Gaines?
Present.
Ms. Rogers?
Present.
Ms. Scott?
Present.
Mr. Russell?
Present.
Ms. Henderson?
Present.
And I am an aye. First item on the agenda would be public comment. Is there anyone here or in the Zoom room for public comment tonight? Okay, seeing none. Moving on to the approval of the minutes. The Monomoy Regional School Committee meeting minutes from June 23rd of 2022. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
And any discussion?
I have discussion.
Yes, Ms. Stout.
Okay, I'm still working on getting you there visually.
Yeah, Sharon, can you flip your screen so we can see your face?
I would like to. I'm trying to, but I'm on the thing that Leah sent, the first one, and it says virtual backgrounds, virtual filters. All I'm seeing is my own computer.
Right, but you're on your phone, so on your phone.
Wait, okay. Oh, yeah. Okay,
on your phone.
I see you. Okay. So the comment
Wait, Sharon, stop. Sharon, wait. Sharon!
you can't.
No, you need
Yeah,
to.
you can't.
Right, so on your phone, you need to hit the circle with the arrows in the bottom to flip your screen on your phone, not the computer.
You can't see me?
No, so if you flip if you look at the screen of your phone, because that's where we're hearing you from.
Yeah.
If you do the button that flips. Yep. Nope.
Is this Zoom? At the top, there should be a picture of a camera with.
Sharon, you're on Zoom, so at the top right, is there a camera?
Left.
Or top left, excuse me. Is there a camera?
I think she's on her phone.
Yeah, but.
Right,
The Zoom phone. Oh.
but on Zoom on your phone, there's a
cool.
camera. Sharon, do you see that?
Yeah, she's on mute, so we can't hear her, whatever she's saying.
I see an arrow, I see a volume, I see a camera.
Try,
You think the
yes, the
camera's
camera.
gonna work? Okay.
Press the
I'll
camera.
touch the camera.
Yay!
There you are. Yay.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, with a little help from my friends.
Okay, so discussion on the minutes for June 23rd. Go.
Okay, so, the part, I was confused by something, and that is, the correction that, happened to, the superintendent's evaluation that Tina made. Basically, the intent of what I was saying was for the, strategic planning steering committee, which wasn't on all the communication with interviewing the people, the companies for the strategic plan. Now it's down to one, that we be on those, or the majority of us be on those. And I thought that that was the way it was written, but when I saw it in print, when I got the minutes, it kind of looked like the whole school committee needed to be on every phone call or any session. And it's not that I'm against that, I just think that that could be unwieldy. Like all of our other subcommittees meet in a subcommittee. So it just could be added to say subcommittee, the school committee strategic planning subcommittee, then for me it would get the intent there.
So
I don't know if
Sharon, under the second
Yeah, that's
reading of the 21-22 summative superintendent evaluation on the minutes from June 23rd, we
Yes.
agreed the final sentence of the summative comment, the words, which includes being part of all strategic planning discussions, end quote, would be added. Are you saying that that does not, that doesn't work for what you were trying to say?
Well, because we didn't have it in writing then, and that's why everything comes to us eventually in writing before we vote on them, or before they're completely done, is that, I mean, I think if Scott and Mark and the three of us on the school committee that are on the strategic subcommittee, if we're going to be meeting with, I forget what it's called, TLA or something like that, whatever the group is that we're meeting with, if we're on those calls or meetings together, and anyone that becomes really significant, all the reports can go back to the, I'm not trying to cut out the committee, but you have 8 school committee members being
Recording in progress.
for every single phone call and all. I think it,
Oh, we've lost her.
Yeah, she's gone.
Okay.
She probably
well,
turned herself off.
We're going to wait for Sharon to hopefully come back. And Tina, did you have your hand up?
Yeah,
You want to wait?
I guess maybe I should wait till she comes back, because we're talking about a superintendent evaluation and not really about a subcommittee report.
Correct.
So I guess to get that specific, to me, doesn't seem right, because we're not getting specific on any of the other committees. So that was going to be my comment.
Okay.
I think it said what we all agreed.
Okay. There she is. Okay, great. Tina, do you want to repeat that?
Oh, yes.
Do you mind? Sharon, Tina's just going to repeat something she said while we lost you. Hold on one second. Go ahead, Ms. Games.
Yep. Sharon, can you hear us okay? Sharon?
Sharon, you're muted.
dropped me off. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, and Sharon, I just made the comment right, I guess, when you had accidentally logged out or dropped off. I just said that what you're saying, because we don't have, or at least I don't, we don't have the superintendent evaluation summary in front of us tonight, because it's already been voted on and submitted. And so I think what you're talking about, though, is something specific to a committee, and this is the superintendent's evaluation on behalf of the school committee. So we all had agreed that the wording, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was, and maybe Leah can repeat it. It's in the minutes?
So super eval is in here.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, but we don't have the full evaluation in our packet tonight because we've already voted on
Okay,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it says, which includes being part of all strategic planning discussions. So I mean, it sounds to me like you interpreted that as all 8 school committee members showing up at the strategic planning. I didn't interpret it that way. I don't know if anybody else did. But I believe if that's what you're saying, you were interpreting it as if all of us were going to the strategic planning meetings. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I just take things literally that I read, and I would like them clarified so there isn't miscommunication. And so we may have meetings, just Mark, Scott, and the 3 of us on the school committee strategic plan for this. And that's fine. And
Sharon, point of order, Sharon, we're just getting off topic because we're in approval of the minutes. So our discussion is now beyond just the approval of the minutes and editing what was in and dictated in the minutes. So unfortunately, unless there is a change to the minutes, like a wordsmith change, a sentence or a phrase that you want to make it this time, we're going to have to proceed with the vote on the minutes as presented, unless there's a change you'd like to make, a specific change.
To the minutes.
To the minutes, not
yeah.
to the evaluation, but to these minutes in front of us.
Okay, let me just see where, where is this in the school minutes?
It's on page 2, Sharon, of the minutes, up at the top, under the second reading.
I don't think the wording, and Leah would know better because she typed these, but I don't see the exact wording here. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it is. After several wordsmith attempts. No, it just says that, which includes being part of all strategic planning discussions. So that's what I'm saying is, I thought that we were going to say, I thought that what we agreed on was to make the strategic planning subcommittee part of all strategic planning discussions.
No, this is, what we have in front of us is what was agreed upon and voted on at our last meeting. This is what was sent with the superintendent's evaluation, with this edit here. So we're not changing the context of the minutes because that's actually what was put into the evaluation and submitted. We can no longer change what was submitted in the evaluation. Now would be the opportunity now would be to change an error in the minutes, but not the context of the minutes. Does that make sense?
Well, I honestly don't, I don't care if it goes in the superintendent's evaluation. It's just a processing thing, and
so if it doesn't, if you don't mind that it's not in the superintendent's evaluation, because we all agree that that's not an option at this time, perhaps it's something that we need to discuss as an agenda item at a later meeting, and it doesn't really relate to the any amendment to the minutes. Would you agree to that?
I would if other people on on the steering committee would agree to it. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that feels this way.
Well, we're not agreeing to specifically what you're saying. What we're saying is that at this time, we need to approve the minutes, and that we can, you can email me or talk to me about whatever you want as an agenda item, and you in the steering committee can talk about something specifically that you, or the subcommittee, for a strategic plan, what you'd like to present, and we can do that at that time. Is that good?
That's fine.
Okay, all right. So I had a motion and I had a second, and we had discussion. So at this time, I'm going to do a roll call vote for the minutes for June 23rd. I'll start with Mrs. Stout.
Abstain.
Sharon, abstention is for a conflict of interest. If you don't agree with the minutes, you can just vote no.
Okay, I'll vote no.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Tolan?
Aye.
Ms. Games? Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
I abstain. I wasn't here.
She wasn't here. Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Abstain.
And I'm an aye. All right, great, thank you. Moving on to our next item agenda, the Equity Task Force recommendations. And that will be Joy Jordan and Mark Smith, I believe.
So I'm Joy Jordan, Community Engagement Coordinator, parent in the district, but I'm here tonight as a member of the Equity Task Force. Mark Smith and I will be presenting this. We had hoped to have some of our members come join us, but summertime is a challenge. We're going to open up with a little graphic, because I know Jackie likes them. just to kind of get some of these concepts in mind while we're talking about these issues, and contrasting the issue of equality, where everybody gets the same thing, versus equity, where everybody gets what they need. And as we know, everybody's different, so everybody needs different things. So just to give you a little bit of background on the Equity Task Force, it first launched in fall 2020. The stated goals were to look at the different things happening across the district that might be creating barriers for students, families, staff, everybody in our school community, and then to make some recommendations based on that review. After the first year, Mark did a nice job of soliciting feedback from everybody about how they felt the work progressed that first year, and there were some suggestions that came out of that, one of which was creating a steering committee that would really have a smaller group of people focused on devoting a lot of time to help guide the work so it didn't get too all over the place, and then to also create some true action items that could be taken, so some work could actually progress instead of just discussion happening. You can see the members of both the steering committee and the general task force members up on the screen here. I'm obviously not going to read them all to you. The larger group of task force members includes some people that were only involved the first year, some that were only involved the second year. You know, some people only came to a few meetings, some people came to all the meetings, but we wanted to kind of acknowledge everybody that's been a part of the process to date.
And the only piece that I will add to that is that we've had a mix of like format types, and we started meeting all entirely virtually as this group launched in the midst of the pandemic. And then over the last couple of meetings, over the end of this last year, we did start to meet in person, especially as we started to get towards where we are today, which is ultimately getting to a place where the task force really wanted to take some action, which is ultimately why we're here today, which is to make some recommendations to you all as a board. And you'll see as we move forward here over the next couple of slides. And the only other point that I would add, I guess more emphasize, something that Joy alluded to as she started, is, you know, we're obviously employees of the district, but we're here representing a much larger group, which is made up of community members, made up of parents, made up of students that did all this work. But we're the ones who are still getting paid here in the summertime, and just timing-wise, it was hard for a lot of other folks to get here. So please know there's, like, all those folks are behind what you're about, the recommendations that you're about to see. And Cindy was part of this work as well. But like I said, there's a lot of people that have been a part of this process over 2 years. And especially, to Joy's point, a lot of the feedback we got in the first year was we did a lot of discussion around equity, you know, that graphic that you saw earlier, and the conversations around what is the difference between equality and equity, what are the equity challenges here in Monomoy. That was a lot of what we spent in the first year, but people really wanted to move towards action. Well, what are we going to do about it? And that was a big focus in the second year.
So just to talk to you a little bit about the format of our meetings. This year, once we had the steering committee in place, that group met more frequently, about once a month. The full task force met about once a quarter, which seemed to be a good balance of, you know, getting people engaged but not asking too much of them. As Mark noted, we were able to transition the meetings from solely virtual to in-person, which was really helpful at a time when we were getting into some nitty-gritty discussions and really being able to bounce ideas off each other. I also just wanted to point out that there are some subcommittees that have been involved as well. The four main ones are the ones listed there: communication, student voice, restorative justice, and curriculum. And those are subgroups that also wanted to dig even deeper into those specific topics as they relate to equity. One of the big projects the task force undertook this year was to create a staff survey, and shared that out early this year with staff. It's linked there in the document. It's on our website. You can see the full results of that survey, but the big themes that came back were that, you know, everybody largely recognized a need for more diversity among the staff, which obviously is something, the district can work on but doesn't necessarily have full control over. The need for more training and professional development on issues regarding equity, and that's a little easier because that's something the district can control directly. And again, the need for just some specific actions that we can put in place. And like I said, you're welcome to go see the full results and all the different breakdowns on the website.
So, as far as a process went, we had very high response rate on the survey. And that was largely because we got some great support from the building principals. They carved out some time for the staff to take the surveys in each of the 4 different buildings. And then the committee worked over 2 different meetings. The whole group committee worked over 2 different meetings going through a protocol of first analyzing the data. Joy was actually really great getting it taking the data and first just organizing it, and then we got that out to people ahead of the meeting so they had some time to process it. Then we went through a process of making observations about the data, and then the next phase was to sort of what were the implications that came from that data, and then based upon the implications, what actions do we think we should take? And then those actions ultimately led to the recommendations that we're about to present.
And another aspect of the data that we looked at was a student survey that was fully led by Christina Tomasco and Molly Graham, who you know as your student representatives. They were the driving force behind a survey that they sent out to students here at the high school. And there's a lot of data in that and a lot of different ways the data can be sorted and organized, so that's not fully complete. And I believe Mark might still be working with them on that part. But the initial reviews showed that there are definitely students in certain marginalized groups that feel much less belonging in the schools, and that was something that we wanted to factor into our action items and our work.
Yeah, so one of the implications and the wonderings that the equity task force had when looking at the staff survey was wondering about students. And Molly and Christina had actually already started developing a survey, and I had been working with them as a side project on that. And so they did develop a belonging survey based upon some other belonging surveys that I had already found, that belonging surveys are instruments are already they're already some well-established ones, so we were able to use some well-established belonging surveys and make them work for Monomoy. So we were able to get, again, with the help of principal of police, we were able to get those out to the students, and we asked students to self-identify based upon some demographic markers that the 2 students helped to identify. And then we were able to disaggregate the data based upon those self-identified demographic markers. And to Joy's earlier point, when we start to look at belonging and then start to separate students into different groups based upon the way they identify, you start to see some differences in the way students feel like they belong at Monomoy High School. You look at it, the overall and the aggregate, students largely feel like they belong here, but then you start to break it apart by how students identify, you start to see some differences among groups in how much they feel like they belong in the school. And they also did a separate section, was the word I was looking for, a different section based upon microaggressions and how students have perceived, or how students have witnessed and or experienced microaggressions. That's a much more sort of complicated piece to pull apart, just the way they ask the questions. That's the part I'm still working on, pulling that data apart. Just the way it was, I didn't think ahead well enough in structuring the survey to be able to pull it apart. It's kind of hard to explain, but the way the data is collected, now it's harder for me to analyze it. I have to do some manipulating of the data to, not manipulating it like changing it, but getting it in a spreadsheet the way in order to be able to analyze it. So I'm just still working on it, and the kids aren't in school anymore yet, as far as Christina and Molly, so I have a little bit of time this summer to play around with it.
Pivot tables. Right?
Yeah, lots of pivot tables.
So all of that background just gives you the framework for the action items that the task force came up with. And they're pretty straightforward. The first one, and we'll go over each of them in more detail, but to give you the overview, the first one is create an advisory council, and that will sort of guide the work of the following three. Create some benchmarks, listen, and train. So for the first action item, it's the creation of an advisory council. And this is probably the biggest shift, and in some ways the task force is sort of recommending itself out of existence by suggesting this, but I think the folks, especially the folks that have been working on this for 2 years in a row, really felt like there needed to be a little more direction and guidance to actually get some work accomplished. And so after a lot of discussion and back and forth through all the members, the goal was to then create a diversity, equity, and inclusion advisory council that would meet with the superintendent regularly and then report back to the school committee also regularly. This would be a representative group of folks, parents, teachers, students, staff, administrators, community members, and I think the goal would be to perhaps even invite certain folks to be a part of it in order to really reach all of the different groups, because we have found that just by opening it up, as we did with the task force, we didn't necessarily have everybody represented, and so I think we need to put the work in to make sure that we're getting a really sufficiently representative group of folks with this advisory council. So the group's suggestion was that the advisory council would meet monthly, starting in the fall with the superintendent, and report to the school committee about quarterly with what they're discussing and the work that they're doing. I don't know if I left anything important out.
Yeah, I would just say the other layer to this is that the group has felt, being a group that's made up of some school staff and not some non-school staff, without any authority, we get to these places, the group gets to these places where they have these great ideas, and then what, right? So, and somebody made the great point, like a task force is normally put together for a short period of time with a task to accomplish, and somebody, a part of our group raised that, well, what's our task? So that ultimately led us to, like, well, if there needs to be a permanent group, well, what's that permanent group, what's it going to look like, and what's its function? So that's sort of what ultimately led to this first action item, is that if there's going to be a group, and its purpose and function is to continue to move equity, inclusion, and access issues forward, then it should be working with decision makers in the district. Working with this directly with the superintendent and advising the school committee. We went back and forth with whether should it work directly with the school committee, should it work directly with the superintendent. Ultimately landed with the superintendent because of its flexibility in being able to meet and then having regular meetings with the school committee as well because of the nature of open meeting law, et cetera, but felt that regular meetings with the superintendent and then reporting back regularly to the school committee was the recommendation ultimately made by the task force.
So the second item is creating some benchmarks, and this would include various types of data collection, various kind of goals to reach. One of the suggestions of the group was to establish some sort of system for people within the district, families, staff, students, everybody, to anonymously report any equity concerns they might have. And we do actually, within our Blackboard communication system, have a tip line functionality that can be converted to that. It's not something we have used to date, but it's there, and so it wouldn't necessarily be an extra cost or anything like that. And then it's a way for folks to submit things, thinking that might be a little more comfortable for some people to address these issues that a lot of people are uncomfortable, maybe calling out at the time or pointing out as it's happening. And then along with that would be establishing some key areas of focus on all different sorts of data, discipline, reading achievement, AP enrollment, all these different categories of data that we've been looking at through the equity lens and maybe setting some actual numbers to that, saying we'd like to, move this number up to here, we'd like to shift this to here. So there's some measurable outcomes that can be looked at. And again, the goal is to start this in September for this school year. These are all pretty ambitious to get this all moving in the next couple of months, but I think there's a big desire within the task force to really get things going after having talked a lot the last couple of years. Can you jump in about the data? Or?
Yeah, I would just, I've presented disaggregated data to the task force on multiple points, and I presented it, to the school committee on multiple points. I presented very similar data to that group, and the group's point was, okay, so we see this, so now it's time to set goals, right? So if our AP enrollment gaps are this, so then where should we be heading, and when should we be getting there, and so start to set, and where are we going to focus, and what are we going to focus on, so start to set some clear benchmarks for where it is we want to be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, whatever the benchmarks are, and I will preface that when I talked to the group, I said, strategic planning is coming. These are great times to be making recommendations for the strategic planning process as well. So thinking about those types of things as we're moving forward. I can take this one if you want. So then that leads, again, sort of thinking along the lines of strategic planning into action item 3. The task force really felt, and Joy mentioned before, our task force as an open invitation, we had very dedicated folks. But one of the things the task force often recognized is we were not representative of our entire Monomoy community, and that we still need to do some very deliberate listening and some targeted listening, and that there are members of our community whose voices we need to capture. And so the third action item is for us is we're recommending that the school district the school committee via the school district does some deliberate listening and conducts listening sessions with traditionally marginalized groups in the community. We're recommending that that's done, and organized through that advisory council mentioned in action step 1. It can be organized, through roles like myself and Joy, the task force, though, was a lot of the members of the task force really did feel that this committee should really consider a third party to conduct the listening, and that does have a funding component with it. And obviously the budget's under your purview, but really felt that that a neutral third party might benefit from a listening perspective if we haven't necessarily done an effective job capturing marginalized voices, then there's a reason for that, and we should consider a neutral third party to try to get to capture those voices.
So I'll start this off, but I'm sure Mark will jump in because this is really much more under his purview. But training would be the last action item recommended. And as I mentioned earlier, the survey of staff really reflected that they had a desire for more training in equity and diversity issues. You can see 66.3% either agreed or strongly agreed that training on diversity, unconscious bias, equity, and inclusion is necessary to help support their teaching and professional growth. So the task force really felt strongly that the better we can support our educators in having the necessary tools to have these conversations, to be aware of these inequities, all of those different things would really be valuable. And again, this would theoretically require some funding, although it can quite easily be incorporated into our existing professional development schedule and our PLC time. So, we have the time sort of available, but there would probably be some costs involved in terms of bringing somebody in or getting resources for that.
Yeah, and the only piece that I would add is there were other places in the survey as well that it showed up that, we asked questions around, people feel, how people felt like when difficult situations arise around conversations around race or gender, or like sexuality, etc. And the responses tended to lean from educators mostly around uncomfort. Their levels of comfort or not feeling comfortable was mostly around not feeling prepared. So it led back to this idea around more training and support for educators. And the task force really felt that, you know, a one and done approach was not the way, that we needed to have a systemic, and there was lots of ideas around that, you know, that's where we kind of, you know, you have lots of people in the room, lots of people have lots of ideas on how to do it, and that's where we kind of really started this, so we really, and it really wasn't the purpose of the task force, at least, I don't know, we kind of, I tried to, this one we could have gone off and gotten into a lot of detail, so we really just tried to narrow it down to there is a need for training, and we stopped there as a task force because we really started to go off into a bunch of different directions. But really felt that there needed to be some systemic training, and it needed to be ongoing, because this work is ongoing, was a theme that came from the task force.
So that's the meat of it, and this is just another graphic that kind of extends the concept that we talked about at the beginning. So you have equality where everybody gets what they need, equality where everybody gets the same thing, equity where everybody gets what they need to overcome these barriers, justice where the barriers are removed altogether and there is, you know, no need for those extra supports. So, you know, I think that's sort of the goal ultimately, but we are definitely sort of in between the equality and equity side of the image right now.
Yeah, and I would add, you know, that ultimately, if you just go back one slide, yeah, ultimately you know, where we're at now is looking at us as a system, right, as a school system, the larger systems that like feed public education, that feed students that come into public education, do create inequities. And so some students have different advantage and disadvantage, which is sort of where the equity graphic comes into place. The ultimate goal is to remove all the barriers, but that's a long process that takes a long time. You know, we were just at something yesterday, Scott and I, for the National Association of Superintendents, and it talks about, you know, it's an 8 to 10 year process to get all the way through this. But ultimately, the goal is you know, I've seen justice replaced with liberation, but, you know, the idea is to ultimately remove barriers so that everybody can access without needing additional supports. But sometimes people need, and that's sort of where we're at now, is understanding that some students are going to need something additional in order to be able to access our at the same level as everybody else, and that's where we currently are in the system. It's pie in the sky for us to assume that we can just remove all the barriers at this point, because a lot of it, some of it's inside of our control, some of it's outside of our control, and a lot of it, even the stuff that's inside of our control, is going to take some time for us to get to the point where we can ultimately remove all of it.
Great, thank you guys. So I'll open it to questions. Ms. Rogers.
Sure. This is great. Under the benchmark, when you had said that the Blackboard has an anonymous tip option, is that on the app or?
It can be.
Oh.
It can be. We haven't activated it, and some districts use it for things like bullying, you know, crisis. It can be used for a bunch of different things. It would be on the website and the app, and you know, it wouldn't be that hard to put it into place once sort of the decisions are made, I'm assuming by the advisory council and the superintendent and the school committee, about exactly what sort of information you'd be looking for, you know, how it's going to be framed, and it wouldn't take long to kind of get it up and running at that point.
Thanks.
Ms. Tully.
Thanks. Really appreciate the work that's been done by so many people about this issue, and appreciate the presentation as well and all that's laid out here. I do have a couple of questions. One is there a target date for when the student survey data will be complete and able to be accessed?
So I need the students back. So, so Molly and I will go back, Molly, Christina and I will go back through it in the fall. So early in the fall. I have it, but I don't want to complete. I've given the initial bits of it to them, and we've done some initial interpretation of it. And then I don't want to, and I'll do some initial and continue complete. So the way the last two questions were structured, students could select multiple options. So when that dumps into the spreadsheet, like you get a cell that has like multiple things checked off. So now I have to take that and break it apart, right? So that and then re-tabulate it together. So I'm going to do that work and get all the percentages all ready for them so they can see how that all shook out. And then I need to have the conversation with them about the interpretations and the implications, et cetera. And then what we want to do for next steps. But it's really been important, both in this whole process and definitely on the student survey side of it, to include the student voice, and I don't want to step on the student voice, so I need to wait until they're back. So I'll do a lot of the legwork this summer, and then early fall we'll have it finalized, and then I'd like to have them come back and present it to you early in the fall.
Okay, thanks for laying that all out. I guess I'm curious as to then why we're receiving recommendations at this point if the student survey data hasn't been factored in to the work yet. It seems like these recommendations then are really coming out of the data from the staff.
Yeah, because the task force wanted to move, right? So, we could continue to survey, and then the next survey would lead to the next survey, and the next survey would lead to the next survey, because we wanted to survey then the community. And we could just continue to survey to death and never get to the point of action. And ultimately this task force that we're recommending could, or this not task force, sorry, the advisory council could recommend other survey actions, but the task force really felt that it needed to make some recommendations to school committee. School committee can ultimately ignore the recommendations of that's your prerogative as well.
I guess if I could just pause you right there, I guess I'm just confused why didn't you wait to make the recommendations until after we got you analyzed and understood the implications of the student survey data to include that into the recommendations?
Because we wanted to act. So how much longer would you have wanted us?
Wait until the fall, that would be I'm surprised, frankly, that you have two main surveys that you're talking about, one that's so critical, the student voices, and you're saying that you need to wait to work with the students and involve them in the process, which I absolutely agree with. And I understand there's a desire to act, but it seems like you're making recommendations based on half of the data.
Well, I think it's also important to note that none of the recommendations preclude any information that will be gained from the student survey. The advisory council will also include students on it, so they will have a voice in leading those other three action items. And training was going to be a part of the conversation regardless, so that won't change. The fact that there will be training will not change too much based on the student surveys. The specifics of it might, but there's plenty of time for that because that won't get started until the fall either. So I think as Mark said, after 2 years of discussion, there was a real desire to come out of this second year with some truly actionable steps. And this is what the task force came up with as a group, the entire group working, including the students. They were on board with this as well. They did not see any reason to hold off the rest of the work waiting on some of these survey results that they were working on.
Okay,
so I think
that's really
there's
important to hear.
nothing in it that none of these four broad categories would change too much based on the student survey results. The specifics that will come out of this work starting in the fall will be informed by that. But I don't think there was any need or any desire, particularly on the part of the students, to wait any longer.
Okay, that was my concern, that the students wouldn't necessarily see themselves reflected in these recommendations based on their
They were
survey. So that's very
part
good
and
to hear.
parcel. They, and
Great.
they were even involved in the presentation tonight.
Great.
Like, they have been involved in every part of the process. So,
Two of the students are on the steering committee as well.
Yep.
Great,
Yeah,
okay.
they
Thanks
they
for-
were in that presentation, making edits and adjustments, so they were fully engaged all the way through. And had it not been summer break, they would be here tonight, I'm sure.
Okay, awesome, that's great, thanks for clarifying that. And then another question I have is, can you talk a little bit about the advisory council and what the leadership of the advisory council would look like in the process for establishing leadership of the advisory council?
So, define leadership.
Who's organizing it, who's facilitating meetings, who's setting agendas, who's making decisions, who's coordinating it, how are those people invited or selected or chosen to be part of the leadership of any group, that's working together. There's usually at least a point person for it. And so I'm wondering, that to me is one aspect of leadership, but it could look many different ways. And so that's what I'm asking you is, what's your thoughts about the leadership of the advisory council?
So leadership or recruitment, because you asked about both.
Both.
Yeah, so recruitment.
Leadership and recruitment for leadership.
Yeah, so recruitment, specifically, we envision, and the task forces envisions initially a specifically deliberate recruitment to have very diverse perspectives on this group. As we mentioned, an open invitation has not brought us broad perspective in our task force. So we envision deliberate recruitment of diverse perspectives on this particular advisory council. So specific invitations.
From the steering committee of the task force?
Yes.
Okay.
And then as far as leadership, then I would envision as far as a chairperson for that group, I would imagine an internal nomination system and from within that group.
Okay. We did talk a little bit in both the task force meetings.
Oh, sorry.
In the task force meetings and the steering committee meetings, that there will likely be some folks who had been in the steering committee that feel really passionate and want to continue on and kind of put themselves up for participation in the advisory council as well. So there will theoretically be some kind of continuum of, knowledge and experience. And then I think, as Mark was saying, once that group is formed, it will be its own new entity, and those members will then be responsible for deciding, we want to elect a chair and a vice chair, and however they want to do that. That will essentially transition the task force into this new advisory council that will then be its own group moving forward.
Thanks. And then, sorry, one other question, is I love to see that there's a real commitment and appetite on behalf of the staff to dive into training in this area. I'm wondering, if we have the ability in our current budget for this upcoming year to provide that. I'm wondering if there are any go-to resources that the district currently has for equity and diversity trainers or organizations that do this work or consultants that you have a sense of what's available or a cost and how quickly we might be able to jump on that.
Yeah, I know Mark will go into more detail, but that's already been happening a fair bit. There's already been some speakers that have come to do PD district-wide, and there's been books that, staff and teachers have read around this issue, and it's definitely not the case, and I apologize if I left that impression that this is going, kind of starting from ground zero here. This is work that has already been done in professional development with teachers, with staff. I think the survey indicated that they wanted more of that, and they wanted it more frequently and on a more regular basis. So there is already a lot of resources in the bag to reach to and use, but it's not something that hasn't happened at all yet. It's definitely been happening, and the desire was just for it to happen more frequently and more regularly.
Yeah, and but I would add, or not But I would add that if we want like a full systemic commitment, then, and a full partnership commitment for the entire district, then it's a different level of commitment than what we currently have. And a partnership like that would be a bigger financial commitment than what we currently have and that we've currently budgeted. And that's where it becomes sort of thinking forward and future planning for, as we think about the next budget cycle. It would be a larger financial planning and commitment because you're talking a full systemic stem to stern commitment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Gaines?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to circle back to the student survey. I'm really happy to see Christine and Molly leading it. We've all gotten to know them, so that's quite exciting. I'm curious, and I know you're still combing through the data, but are you seeing anything that would lead us to explore neurodiversity more? I'm just curious, in some of the comments, students in certain self-identified demographic groups reported feeling less like they belonged in our schools. I'm just curious, because I think we do a really good job academically with our kids in special ed, but I'm concerned that we don't do enough in a social, like really giving them social scenarios, and they are kind of, based on experience and stuff I've heard, they don't really have those social opportunities. And so I was just wondering, are you seeing, I know you're still going through the data,
Yeah.
but are you seeing anything that would lead you to that?
So, I'm trying to remember, and I could grab it. Try to remember the different demographic groups. So we went back and forth about whether or not we were going to have students self-identify whether or not they were like on an IEP or whether or not they had a learning disability, or whether or not we're going to ask them to self-report on their able status. And I can't remember off the top of my head whether or not we did or didn't ultimately land on that one. So I'd have to go back and check to give you an answer one way or the other. I can tell you that in just about every group in which we asked for students to identify some type of difference, we did find differences in senses of belonging. So if that was one, then yes, we did find a sense of difference in belonging, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a little while since I looked at the data. And the way my head's feeling right now isn't helping me think clearly. So,
Well, and I'll say as a side note, as one who was not intimately involved in the process, but kind of got updates and watched it, Mark did a fantastic job really letting the students lead this process. I think it's, as adults, sometimes we want to, tell them what to do, and he just did a really fantastic job gently guiding them when it was really critical, but for the most part, letting them craft the survey, letting them ask the questions they wanted. And so while that might mean, as he mentioned earlier, it's not the easiest output for him to review and sort through, it was that sort of tension between letting them make those decisions and really use their voice and making it easier for him on the back end. And, when in doubt, he let them make those decisions. And so that means that the process is maybe not as simple as when, we craft the survey ourselves and have a little more understanding of what the output's going to look like. You could tell that it was really important to him to let those students lead the process from start to finish. And so, that just comes with the territory, I think.
I'm sorry. I appreciate that, and I will, because you said something about, because I'm only doing this based on my experiences and some of the kids I know. They're not likely to throw their hand up and say, I have autism. They're not, it's just not going to happen. So, well, it might, but it's more than likely it won't. And so I'm just curious in the survey, because I feel fairly strongly about this, and I just think those kids are getting missed. I just feel like they're getting missed.
yeah, and if we didn't Yeah, and that'll be part of what we'll review as well, will be, what questions didn't we ask that we wanted to ask? So, Molly and Christina too were really sensitive to part of it was the time of the year, like students had already been surveyed a lot at that point of the year, so they were really deliberate that they wanted to keep the survey short, so we cut out not only questions, content questions, but we cut out some demographic questions just to keep the survey short. So, if we were to give the survey at a different time of the year next year, we might then be able to ask a few more demographic questions that we didn't ask this time to be able to further, identify different types of students that we didn't identify this time.
Thank you.
Great.
And which, again, when we come back and present the information in the fall, that would be good, good time to revisit that conversation as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for your questions. Mr. Russell?
A different approach, and it's probably summertime. Great task, and it maybe leads to a 10-year plan or a 20-year plan. My thought is, and I may be off base, that is there a way in which we can review equity as it presently exists in our curricula right now? So, for example, do we have a civil rights Freudian slip, a civics course that hits with all the kids in grade 7 or 8? These 3 major topics. Do we have something? Come back to U.S. history. Are there courses that the staff as a unit present in their own way that bring out where equity is being worked on in America? And that becomes an inventory, a list. The first item down here under background, goals, review policies, practices, and systems within our district. So to me, my first blush would be what already exists that our staff is obliged to plan their plans around this for 5 days or 3 days, whatever it might be, and have that stuff ready for us to the committee to review and say, gee, this needs to be addressed further, or we've missed the boat completely on whatever issues it might be. My thoughts are off base because it's too early. The civil rights of the 60s and 50s, how did that happen in the United States? Or am I redefining something in my own head that would fall somewhere else?
No, I think I understand. You're talking about sort of taking an inventory of what we currently do and where we currently are in relationship to the curriculum. I think if I'm understanding you correct.
You're right, Mark.
Yeah, and I would say, as part of our review process. So when you brought up US 1 and civics as part. So US 1 and 2 are actually currently under review because we're making some changes to those 2 curriculum processes, or those 2 courses right now at the high school. So that will be part of that review when they're going through. They're actually doing that work this summer, and. So, but as far as so you're talking about as presenting that information back here to the committee? Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. Just that the task force, I would think it would be reasonable to create a document that lists for the parents and kids and our staff that this is how we hit these issues that we already know about.
Yeah.
We're in this whole different climate in America, that there are some states that we just do not have state reps and state senators get ahead of us.
Right.
So if anyone should be looking over these things that are very delicate, it should be staff and teachers.
Yeah.
Where they say yes to this topic. We do, and we don't, but we are going to. Otherwise, we'll have bills that become law in various states saying, you don't talk about this with kids who are in the third grade.
Right.
Dr. Carpenter?
Yeah, to kind of do a loop back to the last school committee meeting when I was doing the presentation, one of the articles was that, an article that said teaching kindness isn't enough. And I think as we go through the portrait of the graduate process over this next year and identify what are these equity pieces that we want to kind of impart, and the author of that, was really advocating that, where in the curriculum do we start teaching justice? And I think I think, Terry, that's almost where I'm kind of visually seeing where you're getting at, like where, what are those points in America, what are those points in just the civics of our daily lives, that we, can we take on and actually act and be just, like do things that get at the last picture in the series up there.
Great, thank you guys very much. Thank you for answering all the questions. I don't see any more questions, so, all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item, the Harwich Elementary lease to the YMCA for preschool contract extension. For those of you who were not here or don't recall, we signed a 3-year lease with the option of a 2-year extension. This is the first of the 2-year extension. How'd I do?
That was perfect.
Okay.
Can I sit down?
This is Michael.
Hi, everybody. Michael McMillan, School Business Manager. So, yeah, the chair covered well.
Like Jackie said.
I feel it taking the wind out of my sails. But yes, so when you voted, or when the school committee voted back in 2019 to approve this lease, it was a 3-year lease with 2 extensions. So as we were ready to extend it, we wanted to come back and talk to you about it again. It was a start date of August 1st, but the YMCA, who is the tenant, is currently using Harwich anyway for a summer program. So they're in the building at the moment anyway, and they would continue until their program stops in the middle of August, towards the start of the summer. So they'll be there anyway. But we have been happy with how it's going. We're keen to continue to be able to provide those services for the community in that school, and so we would like to extend that. But I know, you may have questions about how it's gone, and you may want, I can bring more data back if that would be helpful.
So this is an action item for tonight. So at this point, I'll open it up for questions or discussion, if anyone has any. Ms. Stout.
Yes, I would be interested in if there's been any feedback from parents, or if I don't know, if we're feeling like our lease amount is good that we're charging. I'm not sure all the questions to ask, but in general, I'd like to know how it is going.
Thank you, Sharon. Don't forget that we're actually in a 3-year contract, so I don't believe the fees would change.
So no, we're not proposing changing the fees at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess, it hasn't changed in 2019. Obviously, inflation has changed in salaries, but, if we increase the rates, that will ultimately be passed on to parents. And, the incremental cost to us of having the program in the building is relatively small, because the building's there anyway, so it's open. We have an increase in custodial costs for sure, or, it's additional work for custodians, so there is some additional cost related to that. But this isn't so much a moneymaker as a desire to provide a service for the community without, increasing the costs of the district. So, we aren't looking to increase the rental fee at the moment.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? I'm assuming Sharon's hand is still raised from the previous question. And so if there are, Ms. Henderson?
No.
If there's no more questions or discussion, I would open it up for a motion. Ms. Scott? I asked for one, didn't look at anybody.
Madam Chair, move to extend the lease agreement with the YMCA preschool for 1 year.
Is that
I
sufficient?
would second that.
And a second by Mr. Russell. And we will do, any questions or discussion? Okay, and we'll go by roll call vote. Ms. Stout? Ms. Stout?
She's muted too.
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Tully?
Aye.
Ms. Games? Aye. Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And I am an aye. All right, great, thank you, everyone. Next item on the agenda is a transportation offset to assessments.
All right.
Give you Michael
Thank you.
McMillan.
Thank you very much. So, so there's a memo in your handout. Each year we receive money from the state to help offset the cost of transportation. This is specifically for regional school districts with, it's a sort of an incentive or way the state tries to offset the impact of becoming a regional district. And so we have to budget it before we know exactly how much we're going to get. We have to, take a guess at how much we think we're going to get. And we budget that each year. So at the end of the year, we can then look back and see, all right, we actually under budgeted, so there's a surplus, and that's where we come back to you and ask you to vote that we can put that surplus against a future budget. So every year, and you'll see this before when we start the FY24 budget season, just depressingly soon, then you'll see there's a transportation offset, and that's made up of both how much we think we're going to get that year, plus the surplus from the previous year.
Great, any questions for Michael? There's no action item.
Yes.
There is an action
Yes, we have
item
an
for this one. So at this time, I will look for a motion. Ms. Rogers has it. Look at her with confidence.
Motion to approve an offset of $214,694 to apply to the transportation portion of the fiscal year '24 regional assessment.
Second.
Second from Ms. Scott. And we'll do a roll call vote for that. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Tully?
Aye.
Ms. Games?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And Chair is an aye. Great, thank you, Michael. Next item on the agenda is the updated subcommittee assignments. I just wanted to give everyone an updated, revised copy. The only change that was made since our last meeting is Terry Russell is on the Finance Committee and Tina Games is not on the Finance Committee. So that's the only change, but I wanted to make sure everyone had the most updated copy for your files or however you like to keep it, kept in your kitchen, on your refrigerator, whatever you do with it.
Oh,
All right. I know. Color sheets for your kids. I don't know.
My daily affirmation.
Yes. If anyone would like a digital copy, please let us know and we'll have Leah send you one. All right, great. Next item on the agenda is the virtual participation of school committee members at school committee meetings. I did try to put in, I did. I put in what our current school committee policy is on remote participation so that everyone had that to kind of reference if it comes up in conversation tonight. And you can find it on the page 6. It's the back. It's on the backhand side, which reference our remote participation. Currently, I am aware, the last time I was on policy subcommittee, that we are working on these policies, but I don't believe any of the changes that we were kind of talking about would impact what we're talking about tonight. None of the changes we're making are going to drastically impact anything about the general idea behind the remote participation. And then I also thought it'd be helpful, since you guys can't literally click on the links in here, I also provided the Office of the Attorney General's 940 CMR 29 about open meeting laws. And you'll find on 2910, which is a pretty far back in this document, is where the remote participation item starts. And that's about open meeting law and how it would apply to remote participation for our committee. So I thought that would be helpful. So at this time, what we're looking for tonight, as we decided as a committee, on the eve of when I believe there'll be some amendments to the current governor's, let's make sure I use the correct terminology, extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, which includes an extension of the remote meeting provisions. I believe that we wanted to vote to just know where we stood as a committee tonight prior to tomorrow. So at this time, we can either start with a motion and a second and then discuss, or we can start with discussion and questions and then go from there. And I'm open to either. So, Ms. Tully.
I would propose to begin with some discussion.
Sure.
And mainly because I would like to offer some information. I spoke with MASC, a representative of MASC today, and as I was on the phone with them at like 4:45, the thing dinged and they got an alert that said the state is going to begin voting on the budget on Monday. Okay. And so in the budget are those amendments that are in there that would extend the provisions of the open meeting law to, I believe it's December 15th of 2023.
Okay.
So I just thought that was information that's helpful to be aware of. Mm-hmm. There are two pieces of legislation that is also dealing with this. The Senate passed something and the House passed something different. And so now they're in the conference committee about those two things. And according to MASC, the MASC rep, I believe I spoke with Tracy, said that, she wouldn't be surprised if during the budget voting, they recognize that the remote participation legislation is currently being hashed out and they may pull out those amendments, even though both the Senate and the House have voted to approve them already. So again, that's another level of sort of not knowing where we are with this. And I'm personally feeling a little frustrated that the state hasn't figured it out already.
Yep. Ms. Games.
Yeah, just wanted to add, because I'm following this for my paid job. So this is something I'm on top of. So the Senate, the Senate did pass in their version of the bill that includes this. They're looking to extend it December 31st, 23, yes. Mm-hmm. And then the House was March 31, 23. So yeah, so what Danielle's saying is they have to compromise and put something to the governor. And I will say in conversations that I've been a part of is there is some discussion, part of the holdup I think, is they want to still have remote participation for the public, but there's disagreement on those of us sitting at a table. Because, for a lot of reasons I'm sure we could probably all think about. So that's kind of, I think, the conflict on where they are right now and why it's taking so long, is there's a little bit of dispute happening. But the audience, as far as somebody coming in there, I think that, is okay. It's just what's happening at this table. Yeah, okay. Or at any table.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess, while there's not a hand, I don't see one yet, it's my understanding that regardless of which way is voted Friday or Monday, at our committee level tonight, we can choose how we want to proceed regardless of what the governor decides or how it's voted. So at a policy level, we can choose to continue to be virtual, and then if it passes on Friday or Monday, we would proceed as we have been. If we decide to stay virtual, but let's just say it doesn't pass at all, which I don't think is going to happen, I'm assuming we'd have to modify to what our policy remote participation would be. If we decide to not be virtual remote, then we would follow our policy. We could vote to follow our policy for remote participation, which just has some slight differences regarding open meeting law, so quorum, the way we address people that are in, we'll call it the Zoom room, they're reporting to the chair when and if they are not able to attend and for what reasons. You can read that. That was part of the remote participation for 2910 for the Office of the Attorney General. So that's what you would refer to. So it doesn't really change it all that much, the governors versus this. It's just a matter of how many people are in the room and how we run the meeting. And then like an executive session, it's something like you have to verbally clarify that no one's in the room with the person who's attending virtually, things like that. So for more clarification, that was me. Ms. Scott?
I was just pointing it there first.
Thank you, you're pointing. Ms. Stout?
Yes, my interest is for our school committee members to able to participate remotely, and I understand about the majority, but I did speak with the disability group, and I think maybe also mask, I'm not sure, but since we've done this virtually, including Zoom or subcommittees with Google Meet, where there's the visual, it would be completely not functional if we didn't have the visual. So I'm going to definitely need this to be virtual with the visual and the auditory. And I'm assuming any other member that was on virtual would need that also. So I know that in the little state thing, they're saying it could be by phone or blah, blah, these different things, but it actually isn't a functioning meeting for somebody virtual if you don't have auditory and visual. We were just talking about the committee a minute ago, and that's the thing that's needed. So I'm hoping everyone on the committee will agree with that.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm just reading through the technology piece to see if it specifies it. The following media are acceptable methods for remote participation. Remote participation by any other means is not permitted, so you have to use one of these. Accommodations shall be made for any public body member who requires TTY service, video relay service, or other form of adaptive telecommunications. I think that's relative to people who are hard of hearing, visually impaired, things like that. And it says telephone, internet, or satellite-enabled audio or video conferencing, and any other technology that enables the remote participant and all persons present at the meeting location to be clearly audible to one another. When video technology is in use, the remote participant shall be clearly visible to all persons present in the meeting location, and the public body shall determine which of the acceptable methods may be used by its members. And then it goes on to talk about the chair or the person in the absence of the chair, if there's a technological issue, utilizing remote participation, suspending discussion, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes like if you go out, we'll wait a couple minutes for you to come back, like if you drop off or something. So that's what that's relative to. So I think that answers your question or concern.
No, it doesn't, or maybe I just didn't understand you, Jackie, because I read that, but I'm speaking not only for a disabled person, I'm speaking for functionality for if somebody was remote that wasn't disabled, but they were joining on the remote, that they would be also able, and I'm not speaking right now about the public, because it's not that I am against the public doing it, but my concern is to be functional. When people are doing, then, when we're seeing these different presentations, that, and even in a subcommittee meeting, that we can see as members of the school committee, everything and hear everything, both of that. We have been doing better than required so far, and I'm asking Monomoy to keep doing better than is required by this.
Okay, I'm hearing what you're saying. So regarding virtual or remote participation, we would not be doing anything different than we are now. I don't see us going backwards, just going to a phone conversation, audible only. I anticipate, regardless of which way it goes, that we would continue to participate if there was someone who had to participate remotely, or if we decide to all continue to be able to participate remotely, that we would still be utilizing this, being mindful of the fact that we pay a subscription for this service as well. And then, of course, yes, as technology improves, as it does so frequently, I would say that I would only hope that our technology would continue to improve throughout. But, who knows? There's glitches every day. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but with the amount of people in town right now, Verizon is just like, my computers at work are just blowing up and stopping. It's like, it's overworked. So there are things that are not in our control, but I guess that's my best advice at this point, that, we're not going to go backwards in technology, certainly. So I think at this point, the question to the committee would be a motion whether we want to continue as a committee to be virtual or not. And if we're going to be virtual, it seems like a simple motion. And if we are not going to continue to be virtual, we also at the same time want to reinstate the remote participation as it reads in our subcommittee policy. So that if we have someone who needs to participate remotely, this is pre-COVID, if someone would have had to participate remotely, this was always there, but we never utilized it because we didn't have the technology, or we weren't investigating the technology for someone to participate remotely, but it has always been in the policy, and we discovered it post-COVID. So if we decide not to be virtual for our school committee members, that we want to be present in the room for the public, there is, in the motion, you would just include that you want to enact the policy regarding the remote participation section, and then we would follow those guidelines. Does that sound clear?
Let's take a motion then.
More discussion?
Yeah, we're just going to have a little bit more discussion.
Okay, fine.
Mr. Russell?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I would be in favor of maintaining the status quo. A brief comment. In no way do I think virtuality promotes or increases the collaboration and the discussion amongst a group of people who happen to be on a committee. I don't think that the original idea of having school committees virtual came about. I think it came about because of pandemic and individual people who might have been ill, which I totally are in favor of getting them present via this type of device. I have never really seen it at its maximum, the quality of it. I think I would encourage all of us, if you're that interested in to be on the school committee, to make every effort physically possible to be present. And there are some of us who can't because of illness, and to that I agree, that either they get a doctor's note, because I really don't see members 5 years from now attending without a hurricane as a good excuse, attending virtually and calling that myself. I just don't see that as a beneficial thing to adopt as the best way to go. I think it is easier. You can stay at home and you don't have the issue about driving in the dark and all the other things. So one is I would recommend it, and the second is my opinion on it. I don't see any way that you would vote it down and just hurt people's feelings for the sake of what? That is all.
Terry, I'm confused on what you just said.
I was going to agree with you, but then you changed it. I'm not sure if I'm agreeing with you anymore.
My initial statement was that I agree with the status quo.
Which is what?
Which is this.
Okay.
Because you said both, so then I was like,
Okay.
do you mean not virtual, but we have
I'm
the
not
policy?
a well
for
person.
remote?
You see. I'm trying my best.
So you don't need to continue virtually, but you want the option to participate by remote
As
under the
needed.
policy.
Sure, yeah.
That's not what I'm hearing.
This is why I'm
So-
confused, because
Yes.
that's what I'm hearing, but I'm not quite sure. We can not we can vote to not participate virtually, but still have a remote participation option for a member, if needed.
I think, may I?
Yeah, sorry, Ms. Scott.
So I think the biggest difference is between the governor's law that may or may not be extended and the remote participation option that is in our policy. I think the biggest difference is that in order for us to have remote participation solely based on our policy, we have to have a quorum present in person. And the chair or whoever is leading the meeting has to be in person. We can then allow remote participation by a member, and it says if physical attendance would be unreasonably difficult. So if physical attendance would be unreasonably difficult, they notify the chair, hey, I cannot attend in person, may I attend virtually? As long as we pass that portion of our policy, which we do have to vote to allow it going forward, that person or two people or even up to 3 people can participate remotely as long as 5 people are in this room in person. So that
I agree with that, Nancy.
and that's what I would agree to. I don't think we need to continue the virtual world of both. So this is my opinion now. I think that being in person is all a part of the conversations. You cannot have the full conversation without being in person. So to have the majority of the committee, at minimum 5 members, present in person. So my discussion or my opinion is that we stop the virtual participation of school committee members and instead then vote to allow remote participation in accordance with the requirements as stated in our policy. So that's my part of discussion.
Ms. Tully, I saw you over there.
Okay, so one thing I want to clarify about that is if we go that route that you're laying out, Nancy, that means subcommittees can no longer meet virtually. Subcommittees have to meet in person, and I strongly disagree with that. That would be a real problem for me personally. Yeah.
May I?
Yeah, Ms. Scott.
I understand, and pre-COVID, it wasn't an option. And we were able to do that, and again, I feel like the conversations in person are a completely different piece to it. And so we will have to figure out how to accommodate, just like we did pre-COVID. So I feel like we need to go back to in-person subcommittees as well.
Ms. Rogers.
Okay, sorry, you looked at her and said. You can go first.
Oh, you want me to go first? Yeah.
Oh, Ms. Games?
Ms. Games. All right, so let me say several things. I'm all about accessibility. Let me just put that out there. And I do believe we, do need to make ourselves accessible when all possible for the right reasons. With that being said, I have really mixed thoughts about this because I won't elaborate on my paid job, but I do oversee 11 regional commissions across the state. And so there are circumstances where everybody is spread out so far out in order to get a quorum. I mean, it makes sense, and this is the whole argument on that piece of it. Yeah. I just feel like we're all in these 2 towns. We're just in these 2 towns. It's not like I'm dialing in from Nantucket, and so I think I really have mixed feelings. And I'm also going to say too that I have, observed in these meetings that things are getting missed. So we're voting on something, and then we come back to the next meeting, and there's a whole different understanding of it. And I'm a little concerned about that because it's not only confusing to us, but anybody in the public that might be following may not know what the heck's going on, because we seem to be going back and changing things and redebating things. And I believe it's because of the technology. And the other thing I wanted to say is a friendly compromise. I think I would also offer us to think about, it makes sense to have this in person. The subcommittees, you are making recommendations, but you're not technically voting on behalf of the school committee. So I think a friendly amendment or a friendly thought would be that to give subcommittees the option to meet virtually if they have to, because they are on different nights than what, maybe what we all signed up for originally when we, got elected. But I believe this does need to be in person.
Thank you, Tina. And I would say that I'm just looking at this quickly. I'm not sure. I think a lot of the 2910 the open meeting law, it has to do with quorum. So where your policy subcommittee doesn't necessarily need a quorum. I
No, it
don't.
does.
I thought it did.
Oh, yeah, that's right, you do.
Yeah, you do.
Sorry. Yeah, so we're kind of stuck. And I feel like it's a little unfortunate for Danielle and Jess because they came in when we were COVID and they've never experienced the committee and how productive we are when we're attending our meetings and our subcommittee meetings, and you've never had to dealt with like the juggling of getting to the meeting because this is what you were voted to do and this is your obligation. And it's a lot, and you haven't probably felt the full pressure of that it's a lot, and it is. I don't know that it's meant to be easy, but so I can see from your perspective, if I'm understanding what both of you are kind of saying, that it's frustrating, but I can tell you from my perspective in the many years I've been on the school committee, that what's frustrating to me is that when I ask my teachers and my administration to be present in a building and I can still participate virtually, I see that as an inequality. And I see us not as productive. I see us missing things. I see policy subcommittee meetings lasting so much longer than they need to because of virtual issues, can't hear, communication. It's just not as productive. And you're both at, or anyone who is experiencing it, you're kind of at a deficit because you haven't seen how it really works, and it's good. It's really good. And that's the reason why I'm still on the committee, is because it's good. Working with people and being in the room. It's a representation to our young speakers. So different to have Miss Blue speak in front of 20 people in here than speak to a monitor. So different. They're not going to learn that speaking to a monitor. So if we encourage behind screen presentations, what are we saying to our students? And I speak to Tina's point that I don't think at this point this applies to a small town school committee. I think it's great for, I'm doing it right now for my CEUs for my license. I think it's great for legislation and state level when they're all over the country or they're all over the state. If they can be more productive that way, so be it. For a small town regional school committee where your audience wants to see you, you're the elected official, I think it's really integral to the position and representative of the body to be here and to make the time and put the effort in to be here. And we've always had a motto, family first. It's always been family first. Can't count on my hands how many times I'm like, I can't come, my kid's sick. But if my kid's sick, I should be home with my kid, not home remote with my kid. So, and that's that struggle. That's that tough. As moms we feel it, as dads we feel it. That's really hard. But I guess that's my standing on it. I would like to be done with the virtual participation, but adopt back the policy regarding remote participation. And then there's permissibility allowed for remote participation for certain reasons. So it's not like that we're not allowing virtual anymore. That's the way I look at it. So, Sharon's had her hand up, I think, or Danielle, was your hand up before Sharon's? I couldn't tell because you're both like this in my eyesight. So you might let Sharon go and then you?
Go for it.
Okay. Ms. Stout.
I'll make a comment then, and I won't make the motion until after Danielle speaks. But so I'm just saying that we all do not have the same experience. When I did psychotherapy in person, I liked it a lot better. When I did school committee in person, I liked it a lot better. When I did psychotherapy on telecommunication, I noticed an improvement and some outcomes. Nothing was lost. That's completely shocking to me. I didn't expect it at all. I have found nothing, except once in a while the audio or visual isn't as good as being there, but I think anyone over 50 is likely to feel like the comments that have been made, and I think people under 50, the majority of people won't necessarily see it the same way because they're more online natives. I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other as long as we get our work done. I haven't seen any differences except when the audio or visual isn't working right, but that's all. So I'll let let Danielle talk, and then I'll offer a motion.
Ms. Tully?
Okay, yeah, a couple of comments. I don't disagree that being in person as a full school committee is better. And I think ever since we started being in person, I don't know that there's been an instance where haven't had a quorum in person and remote participation. If we have, then somebody correct me. And so I think generally what we're doing here in this room works very well. I hear what you're saying about how, Jess and I came on to the school committee in the middle of COVID, and this is what we know. And so, yeah, my lens is this, and I recognize that. And I also recognize that this is a volunteer position. And when I hear you say things like, well, I don't know that it's supposed to be easy, I get that. Like, we're elected to do this, but it also feels like we could be intentionally making a volunteer position harder by not allowing the ease of virtual participation, particularly in a subcommittee. Those meetings are more frequent, at least for the policy subcommittee, or they have different schedules. I think going back to our conversation that we had at our last subcommittee meeting of wanting to increase the access and accessibility of being on the school committee to people in our community, I think virtual participation is an attractive thing. I'm not saying for every school committee, but I think having that as an option to be effective and to be better at virtual subcommittee meetings. If you're saying that policy subcommittee meetings are going too long, well, perhaps that's my facilitation and not necessarily the technology that we're using. And so, that can be discussed. And I put that out there. That, to me, that feels like, we're elected to do this job. It's a time commitment. There are sacrifices with it. And so I would hope that we would want to make this as easy and as accessible for anybody to do this job as we could, and work on our efficiency and our effectiveness with tools to do that. And the only other thing that I'll say is that MASC, they're specifically advocating for an extension of these current provisions for regional school committees. That's what they're throwing their voice behind, is extending these 4 regional school committees. We're 2 towns, we're near each other, we're not very, very far apart, but I just think that's an interesting and important thing to note.
Thank you. I don't know if Ms. Rogers or if you were next.
Whatever you want.
Yep, discussion, yep.
Thank you. Okay, so feeling a little bit flustered by the whole conversation, because I think the majority of us, if not all of us, feel that in person is best. Most of the time, most of us are here, and there are only a couple virtually. I really appreciate the opportunity that if I'm away or I have something else that I have to do, I'm able to quickly jump onto the meeting virtually after my last meeting and be a part of it, instead of when I was sick with COVID and home watching live on the television, wishing that I had decided to join virtually. I was reading, Forbes did this article, 10 reasons why virtual meetings are the best thing that happened in 2020. And one of the reasons was that meetings or events of or events often preclude people with caregiver responsibilities and people with a busy schedule. Remote means more people can participate. And just like what Danielle had pointed out, we were just talking at our last committee about how we can get a more diverse group of people on our committee and hear more voices. And I feel like limiting when we can be remote is excluding a lot of people because we live on Cape Cod. This is a hospitality place. We have so many people that don't work the typical 9 to 5. And so maybe they do only have this little time in their car to be able to hop onto a meeting. Having a remote possibility also helps people achieve a balance, saving time commuting. And it's a great equalizer in terms of membership. Transportation could be a barrier, finances, work schedule, health reasons, but if they could virtually attend on the phone or on the computer, it could bring more diversity to our board again. I remember somebody mentioning how they weren't sure if there were any other school committees that currently have virtual or are still using virtual options. So I did a quick search, and Brewster, Nauset, Eastham, Orleans, Wellfleet, Truro, Provincetown, Station Ave, and the Cape Cod Collaborative all still utilize this. And when I looked at the most recent meetings, it looked like the majority of the Nauset was, no, that wasn't your experience. But then also just looking at the town meetings, so many of them are still having this option. And if it's coming up to the state level and it's a conversation, I just feel like this is removing an opportunity for people to participate, and it's not really helping because we're all adults. We're all on the same page. I don't see anybody abusing the ability to go remote, and so why force people? And that's all.
Ms. Henderson.
So I do see the power and effectiveness of us being in person together. I think that, part of the biggest issue that I have with virtual participation is the technology. That time when it rained and we couldn't hear anything. There was a subcommittee meeting this year where a transformer blew and all of us disappeared. I think that, when you're at the table, you don't have any distractions at home. I mean, there was, I remember a meeting where my dog attended and may have not been appropriate. And so I think that for me, and again, this is my opinion, coming to the table, removing myself from any distraction from my home, or any distraction I'm, in between meetings or coming from a meeting or another place, but coming to the table, I think makes me more present and me more active in the conversation. So I don't know if I could try at a motion. So I would.
Are we done with discussion?
I think everybody was done. Did you raise your hand again, Tina?
I just went,
I'm sorry.
just
Yes.
one other quick comment.
Yep.
First of all, I just want to, for MASC, let me just say this. MASC has an obligation to, because they're the whole state. So they've got, in Berkshire, if you go to Berkshire County, I mean, if you look at some of these places, so they have an obligation. I just wanted to clarify that. They have other school committees much bigger and more spread out than we are. So I just wanted so they have no choice. They have to do that. And before you make a motion, because I don't even know what it is, I just want to go back to really asking us to think about a compromise. And again, I will restate that I think it makes perfect sense for all of us here for many, many reasons, many of us have stated. And I would also ask us to think about, with subcommittees, having it optional, perhaps letting the subcommittees decide amongst themselves, because we may have it, like, say, finance, I'll just pick some. Finance may say we do better in person, so we're going to do ours in person. Policy may say, well, we've got a couple of folks with tight schedules, so we're going to do ours virtually. So I would just ask for a compromise, again, not knowing what your motion's going to be, but that is where my head is. And then I just wanted to say, I wrote down the word participate, and I love what you said, and I also will say that we are talking about elected positions and not necessarily a volunteer saying, I'll do it. So I think when I was running, I mean, I had to think about it too. I had to think about, do I have the time? You know, I had to think about a lot of things, because if I'm just throwing my name in the ring for the heck of it, I'm not really doing myself a good service, or this board or this community. And I think when you run for office, first thing you have to ask yourself is, can I do this job? And if I can't, step out of the line and let somebody else have a go.
Yep.
So that's my comment.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mary.
I'm going to
I
fumble
do have a
through.
Yes, Sharon? Do you have a question?
Yes. I have my motion now after,
Actually,
We're still in discussion.
Oh, okay. I thought, when I heard Meredith say she was going to make a motion, I thought you were going to come back to me then. I'm sorry if people are still discussing.
No, we were still in discussion. You were gonna have a discussion and then a motion, but we were still in discussion, so there was no motion. So now we're done with discussion. Tina was the last one for discussion, and then Mary's making a motion.
Oh, well, I said I would make a motion first.
But
I
we were
think
still
you'll
in
like it.
discussion. Somebody got
sounds
me.
like we're going to have a couple of motions.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
She said she was going to make a motion
Yeah.
earlier,
This is the way I
so-
felt. That's fine.
Yeah.
As long as I don't break any rules with discussion. I'm good?
We're good.
All right. Go ahead, Sharon.
I move to continue to have our full school committee meetings to be held in person and virtually by Zoom or some other audio and visual telecommunication platform, as long as a majority of the school committee members are participating in person, period. Subcommittees will have the option to meet in person or virtually.
I have a point of order.
Point of order, Ms. Scott.
I don't know if we have that option to do. I feel like our only options are to continue with the partially remote pursuant to the law signed by Governor Baker on February 6th, or following our adoption of remote participation as stated in our policy. I don't think we have the option to pick and choose that at this time.
Well, why don't we try it? Because we don't know we don't have the option to do it.
We
may not
don't
be
have the
legal.
option. Is that more clear?
Why?
Because it's not, your motion includes
Provisions that
provisions that
are
are
not in
made
our
up
policy.
that don't exist. Does that make sense?
In policy or in.
They don't exist in our policy or in the current, or in what the governor has put out. I
Can
think
we
I
get-
understand what you're saying, but
It's what he said that they agreed to.
it's, so I hear what you're saying. You're saying you still want, you want it to carry on the way it is right now, is what I'm hearing you say. That you want people to be able to participate remotely and people to be able to attend physically, and that subcommittees also can either be in person or remotely.
That's all, just to continue what we're doing,
To
that's all.
continue what we're doing. So would you like to amend your motion, or would you want to retract your motion?
It wasn't seconded, did
It
it?
wasn't
Well,
seconded, so while we don't really need to amend it, we can,
Restate your motion.
you want to restate your motion? Oh, hold on one second,
Can
Ms. Games.
may I ask just a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Would it be unfair if I heard Meredith's motion? Because I don't want to say yes to one motion if I like Meredith's motion better. Is it possible?
That's not how it works, Ms. Games.
You don't get to pick and choose.
I think we can Sharon could pull her motion. We could hear Mary's motion. There could be a second to the motion and then discussion and question, or we could hear Mary's motion you could pull your motion, we could hear Mary's motion, there could then be discussion before the second or after the second.
After the second.
If it needs more clarification, and then you would hear it, and then Sharon would know if it's what she's trying to articulate. So we can do that. Do you want to pull your motion, Sharon, and hear Meredith's motion? Would that be helpful?
As long as I can make it again, or, I
Well,
don't know.
if you pull your motion, Meredith's motion would be up, and then there'd be discussion or question and/or a second, and then discussion and questions. Then we would have to vote, unless we made an amendment to it. If you don't want to vote that through, whether yay or nay, at this time, you would need to pull your motion and give us a new motion, or restate your motion.
Okay. All right, so what needs changing in it? I don't know what.
Well, okay, so.
It's long.
See, it's not my motion, Sharon, so you have to tell me what your motion is.
Okay, well, so I said, you can stop me at any word if you feel like it's incorrect. I move to continue to have our full school committee meeting to be held in person and virtually by Zoom or some other audio and visual.
All right, Sharon, stop. That's where you lose it. I think what you want to say is that you vote to continue virtual participation.
As the governor's.
As
Pursuant to the law.
pursuant to the Governor Baker's law, remote meeting provisions.
So would that mean it would be audio and visual? Because that's what we've been doing.
That's virtual, yes.
Okay, so, all right, as long as it's audio and visual. Since you have that right there, go ahead and go with that.
No, Sharon, you need to state your motion. You have to be able to state it. Okay, go ahead.
Move to have our full school committee meeting to be held, and then you say pursuant to.
No.
Here.
Jack.
Looks like we have clarifying questions.
Yeah, Mr. Russell?
As I listened to it, would I be mistaken? This
Yes.
goes back 15 minutes ago, Nancy, and you said, in our policy,
Yeah.
there is a paragraph that states regarding not able to come to a meeting, and that person would contact the person in charge, chairwoman, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that's the original form that we must have voted as a policy group, and that would be option one. Option two would be the governor's.
Continue as is.
Correct.
Yes, so what are we losing with the original thought a year ago or 2 years ago? I would say nothing, except that person or persons would make a phone call to the chair and say, for this reason,
Correct.
I'm unable. So if that brings
And the
clarity.
subcommittee piece.
We lose the subcommittee, the subcommittees being able to have the option to meet virtually if we do that, what you're suggesting, Terry.
Yes, personally, I have no problem with that, so I didn't mention it. I thought we initially began talking about the school committee as a body, not the subcommittee working, so I suppose we brought that in, and that might be a second vote, but,
Well, because it's directly impacted by what we vote on.
yeah, true.
Sharon, do you want
Yes.
to take a stab at your motion one more time, or you can retract it and we can see what Mary has written down?
We're all waiting.
All right, I move to continue to have our full school committee meeting held in person and virtually as we have been doing. As long as the majority of the school committee members are participating in person.
Okay. Is there a second?
Sorry.
Okay. So there's no second. So Motion doesn't carry. There's no second. Ms. Henderson?
It might need some wordsmithing, but I'm going to give it a go. I would like to move to have school committee members attend scheduled meetings in person and then to follow the remote participation policy in file BE. In addition, I move to ask the chair to ask policy subcommittee to revisit file BE to address possible flexibility of subcommittee participation.
Virtual subcommittee participation?
Yes. Can I make a comment now?
No.
Well, you've got a
No.
motion, you'll need a
Okay.
second.
Yeah.
I'll second that, so
Okay.
she can comment. and we
Okay.
can
Then
move on.
discussion,
And then
and then I have a question.
comment and then a question.
So my comment is, I feel like we're following our policy. Then we're following the governor's law that he signed.
No. Right now?
Well, right now. But there's no specific language around subcommittee participation. It's just blanketed in open meeting law, right? So I believe for our committee, it might behoove us to go back to the policy committee and add something about subcommittees within the remote participation of that policy. Because I do believe that in some cases, maybe we do need that flexibility. So that's my comment.
Ms. Gapes?
Yes, the irony of this is it's going back to the policy subcommittee, which is the exact committee.
Wonderful!
Which is
Already
the
working
exact
on it.
committee that's asking to meet virtually. So, so if we vote for this tonight, I believe, if I'm understanding correctly, the policy subcommittee has to meet in person in August. And therefore, that's going to be a problem. That's kind of the issue. If it were any other committee, I'd say, okay, fine. But it's going to the exact committee that is asking for flexibility. So we've got a little bit, we're in a pickle.
Right, because I just don't know that there's any open meeting law that supports that division.
Ms. Scott?
So I've been pondering in all of my studyings of open meeting law over the years. The open meeting law, if I remember correctly, and I could be totally wrong, does not specifically mention, no, it does. I was going to say, I don't think it specifically mentions subcommittees.
You already corrected me on that.
And it does mention subcommittees in there. And at the same time, what I'm wondering is that perhaps we ask our chair to speak with council, because if our committee is following our remote participation policy, and our remote participation policy states that we have to have a quorum in person, and the leader, the chair of said meeting has to be in person, but there still could be remote participation. If the policy subcommittee is a committee of 4, that means 3 of you could be in person and 1 of you could be remote. And while the chair needs to be in person, perhaps the chair, if she has an issue being in person, could designate somebody else as the chair of the policy subcommittee for that evening, so that the person in person, the chair, or the leader of said subcommittee is in person. Are you following me, or can I stop talking now?
I got what you're saying.
Okay, good.
I think we need to seek counsel on it.
Yes.
I think the motion needs to be amended.
Wait, can you reread your motion, please?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, through you, could she reread her motion?
That's what I thought.
Yes. I am.
Move to have the school committee members attend scheduled meetings in person and then to follow the remote participation policy in file BE.
May I?
And then take the extra part out? But in addition, I move to ask the chair to ask, because it's already happening.
Go ahead. You're the chair, you should tell me to shut up, that's okay.
No, I don't do that. I'm a very equal person. Would it be simpler to just say to discontinue virtual participation for school committee meetings?
Members.
Meetings and members, and to follow the school committee policy regarding remote participation? And to seek counsel on remote participation for subcommittee meetings. And Ms. Tully, I think?
It's a question, so it's not addressing necessarily what you just said.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's
So-
fine. It can be a discussion or a question.
Okay, so my confusion is multi-layered, there's a lot of layers to this. If we do that, if we say yes or vote to what you just suggested, what happens if and when there is a decision at the state level to extend provisions of the open meeting law?
Nothing.
Are we not then back to where we are right now?
No, we're voting, that's why we're voting now on what we want to do as a school committee, what's best for our committee.
Regardless of what
Regardless
the
of
governor
vote, We
does?
want to do what's best for our regional school committee and for our function. Not us individually, not the state.
Yep.
What's best is our committee as a function going forward. Because there's no COVID piece in this anymore. It's more like, hey, we've been doing it virtually for so long, and there's a group of people who are saying, yeah, it's great, and there's a group of people who are saying, yeah, it's not great. So now they have to move forward with some type of legislation. You know, pre-COVID, God knows this would have ever come up as a topic, but it has. So regardless of the vote, and Ms. Gaines may look like she's going to correct me, I believe that it's what we determine we want to do going forward. And that can also be clarified with council, but I'm pretty confident that's what the answer is.
I guess, well, that's my question then. So we can have a policy that is more restrictive than a law?
The law pertains to open meeting law
Yep.
specifically, and that's what they were kind of amending
Yep.
to allow the virtual participation in the way that the open meeting law applies.
Right. So if that is changed with legislation, open meeting law, if the nature of open meeting law is changed and modernized, I know Tina's ready to jump,
Yeah.
and that allows virtual participation, we can
Yeah.
have a policy that restricts our virtual participation?
As it applies to open meeting law and how they use it. But I'm going to let Ms. Gaines go
Okay,
because she's always full of really good information.
okay.
Hopefully this is really good. So let me see if I can compare it a little bit to the mask policy. So, and I remember having this conversation, I think, with the superintendent about how the local kind of overdoes the state. Remember when we were talking about that? So it's a case where the governor or whatever is going to happen, it's available and it is an option, so you won't be penalized for it. But open meeting law still is what it's always been, which means that you have to have a quorum in the room, and then whatever, if we decide we let virtual people, whatever. So open meeting law is still in existence the way we've always done it. But what he did, the governor, is to give us a remote option. I mean, a lot of school committees, believe it or not, are back in person, and they have been for a really long time. And then some of the others, for whatever reason, are still doing this. So it's not like a law, if that makes sense. It's not like there's a law that says we have to do this.
But that's what's on the table right now is a law that would change.
All right, I'm gonna have to read this again then, because I think it was more of an option, like it wasn't an option at all before. Nobody could do this before.
Right.
Yeah, we couldn't. I was on a commission with, everybody was everywhere, and we couldn't get quorum. I mean, we really could not even meet, we couldn't get quorum. So, but COVID allowed this option to come forth, and now it's back to the local bodies of, do we want to do this anymore? It's like the mask policy. We could have lifted the mask, situation, but we kind of made personal decisions on our own school committee. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. Ms. Scott?
No, that's good.
Okay. Ms. Anderson?
Okay. Can I amend, or?
Yes, you can,
We didn't have a second, did we?
yeah, I second.
Oh, we have a second, but we can, you can retract and amend?
Well,
This is where I get fishy.
I think she can amend, can you pull your second?
I'll pull my second. I retract my second.
Retract your second, amend the motion.
okay.
Yes, point of clarification?
I want to revisit the original motion, which was that you moved to have school committee members attend scheduled meetings in person and then follow the remote
Yes.
Correct.
Now she's going, we've pulled the motion, we pulled the second, retracted the second. She's going to amend her motion, Leah, okay? Ms. Henderson.
I move to discontinue a virtual participation for school committee members at scheduled meetings and to follow the language of remote participation in policy file BE.
Second.
Yes.
She has it
I can give it to you.
She has it written.
Perfect, I will take it.
Okay.
Does anyone else need to okay, so.
Clarifying
Ms.
question,
Nancy,
sorry, clarifying question.
Ms. Gaines?
So with what you read, clarifying question, and maybe I missed it, I apologize, I got a little distracted. So you're, in your motion, it's going back to policy? Is that kind of what you, okay,
Nope.
I apologize. Can you read it again? Yep, please, thank you.
I move to discontinue virtual participation for school committee members at scheduled meetings and to follow language of remote participation in policy file BE.
And we had a second, and I have a clarifying question.
Oh.
Does that mean that we could charge policy subcommittee meeting to research via Melissa, perhaps, of what the possibilities are with the question you had about virtual participation in subcommittee, and if we can incorporate that into the policy? And
Yeah.
Ms. Scott?
I was just going to say, I think that would be a follow-up motion. So let's
Okay.
do this and then
And then
a
we'll do a
follow-up motion
Okay.
to separate them.
Separate.
Miss, is her hand up from the long, Ms. Stout? Was that up from before?
No, yes, I don't know if I can ask this question now, but is this something we could take up next school
Yeah, I was
committee?
gonna ask that too.
And have things in print, like that's the thing that noticed stating?
We don't typically have motions in print. Motions are made at the meeting. And I think our intention was to have it done prior to the vote that was going to be tomorrow, because our next meeting isn't until August, the middle of August. Which actually, yeah, I think is a workshop.
Oh, so we have to do it now, or our next meeting that we can vote would be
That was our vote that was our consensus last meeting, was to have it on the agenda to vote on tonight, yes. If that answers your question. Ms.
Yes,
Scott?
it does.
I was going to say we need to vote because if they do not continue,
We don't have a plan.
then we don't have a remote option at all at our next meeting. So
Correct.
this would at least allow us to continue remotely if the provision does not get extended yet again.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. So if there's no more discussion or questions, I'm going to do a roll call vote. We'll see how this goes. Ms. Stout?
Abstain.
Sharon, abstentions are for conflicts of interest, not if you don't agree with the motion. If you don't agree with the motion, you vote no.
An abstention can also be applied if a person feels they don't have enough information to make a decision, so.
Sharon, do you feel like you still don't have enough information to make a decision?
Enough information on this.
Okay.
No, I don't.
So Ms. Stout is abstained. Ms. Tolley?
No.
No. Ms. Gates? Look at her
And
face.
it is too late for a clarifying question. This,
You already asked one. I thought you were done.
I thought I was. I'm going to have to say no because I'm concerned about subcommittees.
Ms. Rogers?
No.
This is going to be great. Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Yes.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. It's a tie.
Is it a tie?
No.
Wait, no. 1, 2, 3,
Sharon-
4, 5,
Sharon's
6.
number is out of
Sharon
it.
abstained, so yeah, you're right.
Oh,
You
she
guys
abstained.
win.
1, 2, it's 3 to 2.
Because
The
an
motion
abstain
carries.
doesn't count.
The abstain is
So
removed
we have to
from the
do it based
calculation.
on who has voted.
Okay, so motion carries.
Yeah,
Yep,
motion
because of
carries.
the abstention. Okay.
So can
Ms. Scott?
do the follow-up motion regarding subcommittees?
Yes.
I don't know what that would be. I'm just reminding so we don't lose track of that.
Do you have wording for a follow-up, or do you have wording for a follow-up for subcommittee?
I mean, I can read what I have.
Do you want to talk to council first?
Well, that's an option. I can either talk to council, talk to Mark Terry, and see if that's the correct direction to go, or he may have clarifying information that I can give to the committee or the policy subcommittee that will help you with the policy itself. It's up, I guess we'll take a consensus for how you want the chair to proceed, Ms. So you opened your mouth, you raised a hand, you raised a hand. I don't know what mouth means.
There you go, she's talking.
Ms. Stout?
Is there permission for me to change my vote?
No, they've already been taken, Sharon.
Ms. Scott?
I was just going to say, why don't we start with council first? But you need the permission of the committee to talk to council
Okay.
to see if there would be that would be my suggestion.
Ms. Gates?
I am attending a mask leadership retreat this weekend, of which our council is a sitting school committee member. I will see him this weekend. Is it possible, as not in this capacity, that I can bring up the question as a mask member in a conversation I might have this weekend?
I don't see why not.
I don't know why you couldn't ask her to ask him either.
Yeah. Would you like to pose the question, and if you
Sure,
don't get
yeah.
clarifying
I mean, because I'm
information-
sure it will come up in this leadership retreat
Yeah.
we're having this weekend, because other people, this is hot, you
Is
know.
everyone in consensus that Tina can present that question at her next MAS meeting? And if she doesn't get clarifying information, is everyone okay for me to proceed with council for further clarification if she is not able to get clarifying information?
Certainly.
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good. So Tina and I will be in contact, and then I will either be in contact with Mark Terry or not, and then we can talk to the policy subcommittee if that's how we're going to proceed. Okay.
So we don't need this.
No, I
You had it written
appreciate
and everything.
everybody's comments and questions and concerns, and I know it's a lot, and just know that we're all doing it together, and we're a group of good people, good values. We're all here for the same reason. Moving on to the FY22 encumbrances. Follow that, Michael.
Oh, wow. I think you might have nodded off back there.
I'm going to really slowly read each one of them out. So these are the goods or services we received before the end of the financial year, but we haven't yet been able to pay for them for some reason or other, normally just because we haven't received an invoice yet. And so we encumber the funds, we sort of carry them over into FY23, we encumber those funds so we can still pay them even though we're no longer in that financial year, and we need your approval to do that.
Michael, I see that you have a motion on top. Do you need each one of these items written?
No.
You don't? Okay, all right, great. Any questions for Michael? Ms. Scott?
I'd like to make a motion, please.
Seeing no questions? Yes, that's fine.
I move to approve the rolling over of FY22 encumbrances into the FY23 fiscal year in the amount of $52,380.63 as presented in our packet.
And a second?
Second.
I'm going to give it to Mr. Russell. Okay, and roll call vote. Ms. Stout?
Aye.
Ms. Tolley?
Aye.
Ms. Gates?
Aye.
Ms. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Ms. Henderson?
Aye.
And the chair is an aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Next up is Strategic Planning Subcommittee report. That is by,
I did not request this agenda item. Did you, Dr. Carpenter?
I think we were thinking maybe we would be, it's fine, we don't have to.
Okay, we are waiting to have a conversation
Okay,
with
great.
TLA. We are.
New updates. Excellent. Okay, great.
I did get an email while the meeting's going on, but we can catch
Okay.
up after.
All right.
Okay, great, no problem. All right, and Finance Subcommittee update. We have not elected a chair yet for the Finance Subcommittee because we were not in full, we didn't have everybody there, and the person that we want to be chair wasn't there to vote for themselves. So, Ms. Scott, would you like to?
I'm looking for my notes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we met, gosh, that was earlier this week.
Yeah? Feels like forever.
It does. And it was brought to our attention about the housing situation in our area dealing with teachers and hiring new faculty and staff across the district. And so we discussed a lot of different background information, much of what we have talked about at our last meetings, because we actually have Tina and Danielle working. Nope.
Jessica. On housing?
Jess and
On housing.
housing.
Yes.
Jess and Tina.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
No. So that we all know that that's an issue, and so I'm scrolling through my notes to pull out the important pieces. Talking about different options that we could take and where our hands are tied and where we cannot do certain options in terms of new staff and faculty to the district. And ultimately, we came down to that as we stated at our committee, that it's very important that it's not just a school committee conversation, that it really needs to be a conversation across both Chatham and Harwich and us, and even into our neighboring districts as well. It's an issue at the town level as well, with staffing at their needs. They're having trouble filling positions as well. Ultimately, I think we decided, my last note was a joint conversation with the towns about where we're at and how we can move forward. So I think that we ultimately discussed the housing subcommittee of Jess and Tina to reach out to our town boards to further that conversation and see where we can go on the quicker side of slow. Because it's just becoming more and more of an issue in terms of hiring. So.
Dr. Carpenter?
I just have one word addition. So everything that Nancy said, but it's I would say the themes were housing, hiring, and the other key word that was missing is retention.
Retention. I did miss that piece. Thank
and
you.
that we are seeing, and I know that other Cape school districts are seeing the same thing, that you can imagine that that prior to COVID and what we're seeing has happened in the housing market, we had 20-somethings and early 30-somethings that were working in our districts and renting, and are reaching that point in life where they want to sort of buy and settle down, and suddenly at a place where they're thinking, I can't make it work here. So we're seeing some movement out off Cape with this group, and what I was sharing with the finance group was that we're also seeing examples where the applicants that we have who can afford or who have inherited a home or something are people who are top steps. So you're losing sort of your young talent, and what's remaining in the hiring pool are experienced teachers. So you're sort of losing a $55,000 salary and having because they're they're who's remaining in the pool, a $95,000 salary that it's creating issues that we had not seen prior. So we're starting to see some unique phenomena that are happening there in this, and we have a survey instrument that we've been working through, Michael and I, with our HR director, to really have conversations with everybody as they're changing sort of what, to really start logging the data and to bring it back here and share with you, to share with, boards, exactly what's happening, what are the factors, but, just to kind of at least put numbers to what we're at least qualitatively seeing.
Great, thank you. All right. Any questions for finance? The next action item that we had was just to see what the summation of the housing task force is, and then reaching out, seeing what the status of the towns were, the town boards, and kind of taking it from there, and to try and interweave towns' needs, our needs, where are they at with the same crisis that we now
it's extremely magnified and become very present this year in the housing, hiring, and retention. So.
Okay, and that's, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
that was just my, I just want to get a clarifying. What you said is you're asking Jessica and me to step up into the towns, which, let me just say, Jessica has. We won't report on that, maybe next meeting.
Yep.
She's already done a whole lot of work already. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Superintendent's report.
Every minute matters.
Oh, Robin.
So in your packet, in terms of just an acknowledgement and some kudos here, we received a hard copy of a letter from the commissioner. This was the last piece to the regional agreement change. So we had been working hard as a committee, and thank you to all those who have been involved to sort of get our ducks in order to go and get this effective for the new fiscal year. So effective June 27, 2022. The changes to the regional agreement have been signed off by the commissioner and are in effect. So I'd like to thank everyone on the committee who was involved in that. I also really want to thank Michelle Griffith and her team at DESE, who helped move this forward, and also I think Mark Terry, our school committee's counsel, I think was really invaluable in helping us move this forward. Then lastly, in terms of some thanks, we had a number of parents, staff, and community members who were parts of hiring committees to help us with the turnover that we had in the administration at Harwich Elementary School. So we had our Sharon Hughes, our assistant principal at Harwich Elementary, is retiring. We had a group that got together before the school year ended to identify finalists there, and identified an outstanding candidate in Allison Joy, who is coming to us from Brewster Public. Allison had been an assistant principal there, and it was, I just think, a phenomenal bundle of energy and lots of enthusiasm. I think it's a very appropriate last name for Allison, and I think she really, I think, is going to bring a lot forward to the school. I think people are really excited to work with Allison. I actually think a number of people on the committee know Allison. I think we're really excited to see Allison come here as well. Then we had on with just a couple days left in the school year, Principal Oldak she had notified me earlier that she was a finalist, but she was offered a position off Cape at another school district. So we launched into hiring a principal, which is somewhat challenging in the summertime. And I would really like to appreciate all of those who gave up. It's all blurring together. What day are we on? Gave up Tuesday. So we had advertised for the position. I was a little bit worried, just in terms of what the applicant pool might be this late in the school year, and we were wowed by the quality of applicants that we got in that pool. We put together we'll call it a rather unique round-robin approach. We put out emails to staff saying, who would be interested. Any staff member who wanted to be interested was welcome to be part of the committee. So we had a library with how many folks were there, Cindy? About a dozen. Yeah. So we had so we said no to anybody. So we had Cindy was there as well. We had we invited our parents. We sent out a couple notifications to parents. Joy put posts out on social media, and every parent who wanted to be part of there. We also did some targeted outreach and tried to get a parent group similar in size to the staff group that we knew that was coming. So we had well over 20 folks that were giving their time, and we had I think typically when you're searching for an administrator or principal, you kind of have a hiring committee meets, and then they move forward finalists, and then you have them meet with a group of staff and a group of parents, and they meet with the superintendent, and they get a tour of the building or the district, as in my case. We managed to do that all in one fell swoop. So you met with a group of staff, you met with a group of parents, you did a tour of the grounds with Rick Travers and Rick Soroy, the lead custodian. You met with me. Leah, Joy, and Ellen, our HR director, were the escorts around. So we had this nicely orchestrated round robin and met with all six candidates over the course of about 5 or 6 hours on Tuesday. Joy went and took everybody's feedback and was up till about midnight putting all the feedback together. And at the end of it, one of the really interesting things was the majority of the applicants, our staff and parents, really could have seen as being successful in the role of principal, which I think is really rare, that you've got 6 people you're interviewing, and folks are saying that most of them could really be successful in a job. What was also really interesting is one was just unanimously seen as having the potential to be successful in the role, had the highest sort of skill score of the group, the highest rating of the group. So when we got back together, the conversation I had with everybody is, rather than trying to differentiate first, second, third, maybe let's focus on just number one. So we focused on number one, and Mark, Melissa, and I went, and I think we're humbled today with reference checking, because I was telling people that I'm starting to feel a little less than, because I don't think people cried when you ask people at Lincoln Sudbury about me. But I would like to announce for the first time publicly that we have offered a position to Christy Harvey Couture, who is coming to us from Claypit Elementary and Wayland Public Schools. And during our meeting, I received a signed contract back from Christy, so we are glad to have her with us. I know she has reached out and let her school community know that she'll be coming to us. Christy has a house on the Cape here in Brewster, and I think she's been sort of mulling, maybe it would be nice to not go back over the bridges so often. So I just wanted to invite her. I'm hoping she's not having second thoughts, because she did sort of join us at the beginning of the meeting, and I was being really optimistic. I told Jackie, I said, let's shoot for 7:30 in time today. So, Christy, if you'd like to say hi or anything, you're welcome.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here, and I'm not put off at all by this meeting. I think it's amazing that all of you are giving your time and energy to your community, and I'm really, really thrilled to join you and to start working in Harwich. So thank you so much for putting your trust in me, Dr. Carpenter, and team who interviewed me. I really just thrilled tonight. I can't wait to get started.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Welcome.
Congratulations.
Welcome to Monomoy.
So I think before we walk out of the room, Joy will have something flying out there in social media, and there'll be a posting. But we're so glad to have you on board, Christy. And I am quite serious. I have never, in all my 20-some-odd years as an administrator, done reference checks and had more glowing comments on the other side. In fact, one person told me that this was going to be the best hire of my career.
Wow.
So.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. It's really kind.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. And on behalf of the committee, thank you, and welcome to Shark Nation. So Proud to be a shark. It's so exciting for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for me.
All right, thank you. All right, and we are up to declaration of surpluses.
Look left, look left.
Ms. Henderson.
I moved to approve the declaration of surplus as presented in our packet.
Second.
Okay, and discussion, questions, no. Roll call vote, Ms. Stout.
Aye.
Ms. Tully.
Aye.
Ms. Games.
Aye.
Ms. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
And Ms. Henderson.
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. Great, thank you. And we've had the presentation of the warrant, so at this time, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
And roll call vote, Ms. Stout.
Aye.
And Ms. Tully.
Aye.
Ms. Games.
Aye.
Ms. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Ms. Henderson.
Aye.
And the chair is an aye. And we will adjourn at 8:59. 8:59.